The file is encrypted before it gets sent to the cloud. There's nothing that gets sent that's not encrypted in your vault.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Techlore Talks. Today, I'm really excited to have on Bitwarden. We're going to talk about the origins of Bitwarden, how they're able to fund this open source password manager, community involvement, the security posture of Bitwarden, as well as the privacy posture, comparing Bitwarden to other password managers, why you should even use a password manager, best practices with your password manager, and so much more. If you've been looking for a deep dive on password managers and or Bitwarden, this is it. And now to the interview. All right. I would like to introduce Ryan from Bitwarden, if you want to say what you do.
Hi, I'm Ryan. I work at Bitwarden as a senior PMM, that's product marketing manager.
Nice. How did you get involved with a security company? Did you start with security and then, get into the marketing for security, or did you start with marketing and then stumble on a security company?
No, it's actually a really funny story how I started. I actually have a background in film and multimedia. I was a part of that industry for quite a few years. I didn't like where it was going. And after seeing a couple of bad business decisions be made by some of the studios I was working at, I decided to go get a business degree so I could do it better. And I found my passion really in marketing over there, just telling stories, connecting with audiences, which is, basically what I did before, right, when I was doing film editing and such. And right out of business school, I got hired by Dell, and I was at Dell Technologies for 6 years, selling laptops, Alienware products, monitors, other things, like working on product messaging for all that, working with the engineers, seeing all the prototypes. It was a really, really fun type of gig. And then I found my way over to Bitwarden. I was really intrigued by the open source and security nature of it all. It's funny because at the time I didn't actually use a password manager. So Bitwarden was my first exposure to password management. And, I was interested to learn more. I had started trying a couple of different solutions out, and I ended up joining Bitwarden in two ways, personally and professionally.
Very nice. And what's kind of the origin for Bitwarden? I mean, it's pretty prolific in our community. Everyone knows who Bitwarden is for the most part in our community, but I don't personally know the origins there.
You can read all the stories online. Our founder, Kyle Spearin, he decided to develop Bitwarden on his own after being disenfranchised by another password management solution that he was working on. He realized, man, this password manager is really not great for business. What can I do to make a password manager that works for everyone? And that was basically the genesis of it. He started off as an open source project. You can go back and find the original post he made in 2017 on Reddit and on Hacker News announcing his project, and built up a community support from there, just working with open source. He has plenty of interviews. I highly recommend you go listen. It's pretty enlightening.
And have you guys been open source from day one?
Yeah, absolutely. Mm-hmm.
All right. So what's your overall team size as well?
So we've come a long way. We're up to about 250 employees now, employees and contractors. So, really, really working hard to, make Bitwarden the best product possible.
Wow. And I guess the one thing before I get into the open source side of things, funding. So of course you guys have free, you have paid for individuals, and then you have enterprise. And then I do know that there are funding models as well with some VCs. So how does that all interplay, and what's kind of the relationship there for the company if people are curious about that?
Yeah, so Bitwarden has a free plan, always has a free plan, always will have a free plan. We've made that promise many, many, many times. And Bitwarden, most of the income that we see, funded income, comes from the people who pay for premium plans on the individual side, but most importantly, business plans. So the business plans do make a large portion of the funding for Bitwarden. And it's actually thanks to the community that we even get those business plans in the first place. One of the things that we find is that most businesses started off looking at password managers, and somebody who's using Bitwarden says, hey, Bitwarden's great. I'd love to bring Bitwarden into the office. And we always have some sort of champion who's helping us out and really touting the benefits of open source and bringing people along. So to us, it really comes all from the community who goes out and brings Bitwarden to work. We actually once ran a campaign called Bring Bitwarden to Work. It just comes back to us through there. And then we also want to continue that engine And so Bitwarden also gives free families plans to any enterprise user, so they can take Bitwarden back home to more people, and maybe, get their brothers, get their sisters, anybody, their children, using Bitwarden and used to it. So then when they go out into the workplace, they are also interested in bringing Bitwarden to work. It's a really great engine. And you had mentioned some VC funding as well. The growth announcement for that was made in 2022. Like, you can find all the disclosures and stuff online. It really is it was a growth investment. You can read all the specific details about it. I would just recommend going and looking at that.
Yeah, I mean, do you mind covering what a growth investment is? And because some people hear VC and they go, well, so are they still going to be open source? Do they still have decision-making authority, et cetera? Like, so what does that mean for a regular person?
Yeah, so a growth investing. So again, I'm not on the board. I don't understand like all the inner workings about this. But a growth investment doesn't preclude any additional or any sort of control. It really is just like, hey, here's money, make it better type of thing. So those details are posted online and is the right language to make sure I don't say anything that's not correct.
Is the general idea that it's an investor that goes, hey, here's money. They're just expecting a return on investment while you just build the company the way you want it?
Mm-hmm. That's probably a more accurate way to say it, yeah.
So with the open source side of things, I want to start by just, if someone's new and they're learning about Bitwarden, I know our community is very much into the open source world, so I don't need to really tout too much of the benefits there for them. But if someone's new, they're listening to this, especially in the password manager, what is the benefit of being open source compared to maybe not being open source? There's a plethora of non-open source password managers out there that are typically recommended. But what do you think that really provides?
Yeah, let's talk about a closed source, proprietary source, whatever you want to call it. People who prefer or decide to go with a closed source model, they like the idea of security through obscurity. That is, there's like a veil. Nobody knows how things are working in the background. And so because of that, they believe that it's going to be more difficult for hackers to find any vulnerabilities to get in and break the product. We'd like to say like hope is not a strategy, but that's really what it comes down to. They're just hoping that somebody doesn't find a vulnerability and take advantage of it. With open source, we have the transparency of having all of the Bitwarden source code posted on GitHub. Any of your users right now can go to github.com/Bitwarden and see the code that's currently in development, for one, if anyone wants to kind of scoop us on some of our product announcements. And two, like there's an entire huge security community that loves to go around and poke around the code and see stuff. And with 50,000 people or more, like with eyes on Bitwarden code, there is no obscurity. Any vulnerability is found and rapidly solved and fixed. People can submit PRs for it. We also do have third-party audits and everything. So like, what would you trust more? Somebody who's like, oh, trust us, we're good, or another company that says, you don't have to trust us. Here's how everything works. And that's really like the gist of open source trust and open source security.
Nice. And then I guess a typical follow-up question I have when people are open source is, I'm not going through and personally diving into the code myself for all the open source software that I use back here. So do you guys do maybe audits, consistent audits that will audit the code and make sure there's no obvious issues?
Yeah, absolutely. Like not only do we do our internal audits, where we have the community audits, we also have third-party audits as well. Cure 53. We also have bug bounties as well through HackerOne too. So we always have those reports coming in. You can actually see everything disclosed on our website. Bitwarden.com/compliance has a bunch. Then if you do a search for audits or security reports, you'll see every year's report that comes through, all the testing, all the work that's been done to solve anything that's been flagged as a potential issue.
And are those you said there's internal audits, there's community audits, and external audits. So I think the most familiar one to a lot of people might be the external ones, like Cure 53, Molvat VPN does those. A lot of other security and privacy organizations do these audits. But can you explain the community and the internal ones that you guys do, and if people can kind of see those?
Yeah, so the community audits, again, like those are just people going through on the GitHub and looking at code, and just hobbyists, security enthusiasts who are trying to do make sure that they can trust the solution that they're using. And then we also have our bug bounty program through HackerOne. We actually recently wrote a blog post about that program, and you can see more details there, including links to the HackerOne program. And these are people who will try to attempt to find bugs inside of Bitwarden, inside the code. When somebody is putting together a group of people to put together, like, I don't know, like some sort of like a community pen test or group like that, like we're happy to oblige by providing subscriptions, test subscriptions, so they can try and see what they can find.
Cool. And the other kind of layer to this is forking the code. I think another foreign concept is, someone can just take your code and duplicate it and then spin up a similar service. Is this something that you guys are concerned about, Bitwarden clones, or something that could be a threat to a business or an individual? Or do you see that as just kind of a natural part of the open source world?
Yeah, that's just something that comes with open source. We support the open source community. There is a community tool that a lot of folks use right now for self-hosting that's built in Rust from some forked Bitwarden code. And it's compatible with the Bitwarden clients, and we're friends with those folks. We made a couple of requests that they change their branding and all that, but we're not, we support the open source community and what they do, and it's also a really good. Some people will say, like, well, what happens if like a meteor strikes and Bitwarden is wiped off the face of the earth? What's going to happen? Well, hopefully it doesn't take off all the GitHub servers at the same time too, because then people could just grab the code and like continue on the service as it goes on.
Yeah, nice. And I guess another question, you guys have a pretty large team. So my assumption here is that it's mostly internal, but do you have a general idea or percentage of community driven versus internal development? Like, do you get any massive work ever done by a community member on your source code?
Sometimes the community members will put together something really amazing that will bring in that has a huge impact. One of the ones that came in from a community that is off the top of my head that I know, so I don't deal with the code every day, but I remember one was a new KDF algorithm called Argon 2 ID, or Argon 2. People might be familiar with that. Until this community member created this PR, this code commit for Argon 2, like we didn't really have it on our roadmap, and now it becomes like a big touted thing. Like, hey, look at this. Bitwarden supports Argon 2, which is a memory hardened version of the KDF algorithm for that people can choose as an option if they like.
Great. And then I'm going to talk a little bit more soon about the privacy and security architecture. We can dive a little more into the weeds there. But on the topic of self-hosting, before we get there, do you generally recommend people stick with the hosted version of Bitwarden? Are there pros and cons to people who want to self-host? Who do you typically recommend that option to?
Yeah, so mostly for self-hosting, we recommend it to enthusiasts who really want to self-host and have concerns about data sovereignty. Maybe people who want to put some extra security on it that they control, such as a reverse proxy, firewalls, VPN requirements for their servers. This sort of thing is usually for people who have like advanced technical knowledge, and in particular, they also understand what it takes to back up a server. Because if you have everything on your own, say NAS, or even some of the less complex folks might have just like a running on a Raspberry Pi or on their home computer. Sometimes there's uptime is your responsibility at that point, right? Backup is your responsibility. So for the people who are really interested in self-hosting Bitwarden, especially for some of our business customers, one of the first questions we ask to qualify them is, have you ever self-hosted anything else? That's usually like a really good clue of whether or not somebody might actually have the technical know-how or capabilities to do such a thing. I have some friends personally who's like, oh, I have my NAS server and my own photo upload system set up, and the NAS is hooked up to like a UPS, and I got extra failover with another buddy's NAS. Yeah, okay, self-hosting might be for you, but we include the cloud hosting for free. That's kind of like the best way to think about it, is like Bitwarden self-host is free, and so is the cloud hosting, right? So the cloud hosting is probably best for most people.
Got it. And then the last question before we dive a little more into the privacy and security here, the UI UX. So my understanding is that you guys used some kind of cross-platform code base and you've been slowly migrating to more native apps. If not, you already have migrated to some more native apps. So what's kind of the thought process behind that, and where are you in that journey?
It might be something that might be worth getting our architect on for. I do know a couple of things about this. So first, we did recently, and by recently I mean in the last year and a half or so, migrate all of our mobile applications to native code. That would be Swift for iOS, and that'd be Kotlin for Android. And that was a big adjustment that we had to do internally because we were moving everybody off of Maui, which was the language that we were using before that. And then there's also been some additional movement on updating our desktop application, but that sort of thing is still in progress and being investigated.
Cool. Have you guys been able to roll out any new features as a result of this? Like, have you been able to do more system integrations as a result of the native rewrite?
Yeah, actually, we had a fun one come out, actually both in the same month towards the middle of last year. On Android now, you can do what's called responsive colors or reactive colors. It's part of the Google Material U thing. So if you wanted to set it up, you can have your entire vault be recolored to match your background on your phone, which is fun for some things. And then we also have on iOS, we have some Siri integration. So you could ask Siri to do things like Siri lock my vault or Siri log me out. Just fun little things like that.
Nice. Yeah, no, it's always nice. That's like the benefit, I think, of moving to native apps. I'm personally excited. When I tried Bitwarden a couple years ago, you guys didn't have native apps yet. And that was one of my big things. I'm like, oh, it'd be really cool to have a native app for Bitwarden. So I should go ahead and download it again to try out the
give
apps
us
now.
another shot. I think you'll like what you see. There's also been a few redesigns since then of our extension as well, the web app. And then also we have a design team who's working really hard to get some really good unification going. I think you're going to see some pretty big improvements to UI and UX in the next little bit too.
Nice. No, that's exciting. So privacy and security. I kind of want to start with the general concept first here, because anytime I cover password managers on this channel, I think we have our audience, we have the intermediate users, but I feel like true beginners, people who have never heard of this concept before, their first fear is, oh, this sounds scary. This doesn't sound safe. I'm putting all of my eggs in one basket. So can you just kind of start off by talking about why is a password manager more secure, and when it's maybe not more secure for a regular user, so people just understand why this is a useful tool in the first place?
Oh boy, let me give you the whole pitch here for why people even need a password manager. So I think the first thing, let's think about, I mean, shoot, like I don't even know what was the latest breach we've heard about. There's so many, right?
I can pull up my RSS feed if you want. Let's see. We had PayPal to breach, exposed user data for 6 months, social security numbers, and unauthorized charges. So that's a big one.
That's a big one.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway,
French bank registry, 1.2 million accounts. Mississippi Medical Center. Yeah. Anyway,
all these sites have had breaches, right? And so there's a lot of people out there, like myself included, before I even first joined Bitwarden, where it's like, oh, I have my own system for a password. I use my same email address that I use or username for everywhere else. Shoot, sometimes I use like my AIM screen name that I created like in the late 90s, right? And then I would have some prefix, whatever I was logging into, what was about, say, insurance, and then a suffix. Like, okay, I got it. I can guess my password if I ever need to. And that worked for a certain amount of time. But, you start getting a lot of breaches, breach here, breach there, breach there. And then suddenly people are able to like cross-reference databases like, hey, look, this username and this password was breached here. This username had this password here. Oh, look, there's a pattern. Let me see if I can try and log it everywhere else. And there's also such things called, they're called rainbow tables or compilations of the most commonly used or known passwords that have been created by humans. And what some people will do, especially if they can get an offline copy of some data, is that they will just try your username and then millions and millions and millions and millions of passwords that exist out there, and then maybe they'll get a hit. Like maybe, oh shoot, maybe you used admin Minda. Like that's a very common like combination, or password 123. Or if something gets leaked, like people always have to rotate passwords commonly. They might have their password, whatever password, and then we'll say like 1 at the end of it. Oh, I have to rotate it after so many months. It'll be 2, and then they have to rotate it again. So what happens is that, well, the hackers will start going like, okay, well, I'll set this algorithm up that will attempt to log in with this breached password. And then, oh, it ended with a 1. Well, let me try logging in with a 2 at the end. Oh, guess what? We just got in. And so these are called credential stuffing attacks. And they're probably the biggest threat and that you see out there. Basically, people will have botnets that can just attempt to log into your account. And they are attempting to log into your account hundreds and hundreds of times a second with passwords that have leaked out on the internet, including ones that you might have already, if you especially bad, if you're someone who reused a password anywhere. So if you reused a password, say, I don't know, like even let's go back in the day if you wanted to break something out. Let's say you had a Neopets password that was like really strong, right? And then that got leaked, which I think happened like several times. But you use the same password at your bank account, right? Like they're going to try that. Like these people are going to do that, and they just have algorithms and programs that are doing that. So, why is a password manager important? I don't know any of my passwords because they're all machine generated. They're all 18, 20 digits long of just random strings. I have no idea how to log into my investment accounts. I have no idea how to log into my bank account. I can't even log into my insurance account, like I had mentioned before, because I don't know those passwords. I don't need to know those passwords. The password manager takes care of all of that for me. All I need to know is the master password for logging in.
Got it. And later I have a whole section dedicated to the eggs in one basket argument. So, because it's also going to tie into 2FA, what you suggest users do, how you can maybe make Bitwarden even more secure to help protect against these things. So I want to touch on that later. But before we get there, so I think that's a pretty understandable use case because a lot of people either like forget their passwords and it's annoying to have to reset your password every time you log into a service you created 3 years ago. So it makes a lot of sense. But nowadays, you have browser password managers built in to browsers. And also some people just keep local notes. So can you maybe speak to why still a dedicated password manager might be useful compared to those tools, or where maybe some of those other tools might be okay for a user?
Yeah, so a dedicated password manager, especially one that's cloud-based like Bitwarden, pretty much you can gain access to your password from any device that you need to. So this is especially handy if you're traveling or if you lose your phone and you need to log in on a friend's phone. This way you can just like have cross-device syncing. I mean, you seem to be a techie. How many devices do you own?
It's complicated because there's like review devices for the channel. There's my devices. There's like the NAS that sits behind me. So it's pretty all over the place.
You have a lot of devices, probably all running different operating systems, right? So it's especially handy. I actually just recently replaced my phone. I was using an older Samsung like S21 and then FE, like Fan Edition. I don't really prioritizing having like the newest and the greatest phones. Samsung released an over-the-air update that broke my SIM card. Like my phone could not connect to anything at all. And so I had to run out that day to go and buy a new phone. First thing I install, Bitwarden. Like I can just log into every service, no problem. It's so easy, especially if you're ever like reformatting computers, getting a new computer. It's very handy that way to have something that's cross-platform and cloud synced.
Yeah, what I like to do in my password manager is I have a folder label tag, whatever the system the password manager uses for a new device setup. So there's probably like, your email client, whatever you use to sync browser bookmarks, et cetera. There's probably like a set list of accounts that you want to set up consistently anytime you update a device or you get a new device in your workflow. And for me, that was a big help for this exact thing. So kind of the next question I have here is the cloud. I feel like people are rightfully skeptical of the cloud. It's not your computer is kind of what it is. It's not a cloud either. It's someone else's computer. Like all of these kind of phrases exist. And so when you think of storing your passwords on somebody else's computer, that's a pretty intimidating concept. When you put it this way, even I get a little creeped out, even though I understand fundamentally what's going on. So can you maybe speak to zero knowledge, end-to-end encryption, what that looks like, what it guarantees, what it doesn't, kind of the threat modeling process behind that?
Yeah, absolutely. And this was also something that I was first nervous about when I had first learned about password managers at all. I remember hearing about one that had taken the market by storm back in 2009 And I was like, why would you trust something like this? This doesn't make any sense for that. But this is before you had hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of accounts, right? It was like, oh, I have 5. I can just remember everything I need. So the really important part about this process was what's called end-to-end encryption. For people who aren't very familiar with cryptography, you actually are. You're just not familiar with the modern term of it. So A equals 1, B equals 2, C equals 3, and then you just like write a code as you pass as a note to somebody. That's encryption. It's way more complicated than that these days because A equals 1, B equals 2 is something that someone could crack in half a nanosecond. And instead, there's a lot of mathematical like cryptography that goes into making sure that something is encrypted in a way that nobody else can read it except for the person who has the key. And when you work with an application that's end-to-end encrypted, and you can confirm that Bitwarden is end-to-end encrypted because it's open source, you can see how all the clients work. The file that has all of your passwords in it is encrypted on your device, so on your computer or on your phone, before it gets sent to the cloud. And that's where it stays in storage. It goes in the cloud storage. There's extra layers of encryption that goes on top of it to make sure that it's absolutely 100% secure. And then when you log in later, that encrypted thing comes out of storage and gets sent to your phone or your laptop or your computer. And then you enter in the key to unlock it. And then it unlocks and decrypts again on your device. And there's nothing that gets sent back and forth that's not encrypted in your vault.
Perfect. So you mentioned earlier Argon 2. Do you mind expanding where that fits into this picture and how and where that gives people a bit more protection?
Yeah, so this is where things get a little complicated, thinking about how deep to go. Okay, let's go all the way down. We're going to go all the way down. So when you enter in your master password, that's not actually the key that unlocks your vault. And you can read all this in the Bitwarden white paper. It's all posted online. You can just check everything on the security white paper. But when you enter in your master password, it gets seeded with an account seed that's also based off of your username, and then becomes stretched out into a really long random code. But it's not completely random because it's determinate, right? So it just gets stretched out into a really long code that's suitable for using encryption. And then that is used to unlock an even bigger code that's actually what's used for decrypting your vault. And so like your vault is actually stored with this really, really big key. Now, the way to get to the key that unlocks the bigger key, first you have to go through what's called the KDF algorithm, which that's key derivation function. And what happens is that imagine like a giant long mathematical formula, right? You enter in the first number and then it goes through the formula and then it spits out a different number. That's considered one iteration. So when you enter your master password and then it gets stretched out into a key, then into the first key, and then it goes through the KDF algorithm, it spits out a different key. By default, we use PBKDF2, and by default, that's set to 600,000 times. So I said you have to you grab it, it goes through, and then you take that result, you feed it back into the algorithm, and you do it again, and then you do it again, and then you do it again, 600,000 times. And the point of that is to be a speed bump for people who are trying to just guess your password, right?
So it's intentional slowdown.
It's an intentional slowdown. So it takes a lot of resources to do it. And if you think about how many guesses somebody would have to do to get to your correct password if they don't know anything about you, is a lot, right? So after 600,000 times running through this on the default key derivation function, then you get at what's called the master key that can then unlock your vault. Now, Argon 2 ID uses things in a different way. Instead of going from taking the result and dropping it back, taking the result again, that's a very processor intensive function and could be a little bit weaker to GPU attacks. So that'd be somebody who's using imagine Bitcoin miners, right? Who have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of graphics cards that are just running because they have a lot of cores. And so they're able to run this process a lot more efficiently, a lot more quickly. Now, Argon 2 ID, the way that works is that it requires basically filling up memory every time that it runs an algorithm. And so it really slows things down because these days your graphics cards are probably more constrained by the available VRAM than they are by processing cores. And so that just somebody who is trying to guess rapidly would quickly fill up all their VRAM and then crash their system. So it constrains how quickly they can make guesses significantly that way. Does that make sense?
Perfect. Yeah. You mentioned earlier on that there was some kind of key generation based on the username. Is that
Yes. So that's currently how it is. There is some work being done so that username can be changed without affecting the encryption. So anybody looking at the code right now would be able to see that that work is being done. So
right now, if you can't change your username, or if you do, then something changes.
If you were to change your username in a way that we do it right now, it would generate a new key. You do that through the security tab. No problem. You can still change it. It becomes a little bit more complicated in businesses when they're using SSO login, and then somebody needs to change their email address. For example, they got married and they want to change their last name. It becomes a little bit more complicated that way. So that I'm trying to make that a little bit more modular.
Got it. And does that mean that I know this is so like not really a part of it, but technically, does that mean that the username you choose has like the most tiny difference in the security of the rest of the system, or does the rest of the system kind of supersede any kind of tiny benefit there?
Right now, it's just basically used a little bit as a salt.
Okay.
You can look up to see exactly how it works. We're a little bit over my head here, but yes. So that's also why too, if somebody were to do a vault export, if they choose like what's called an account specific export, and then you try to import again later under a different email address, that won't work because it requires the way the seeding works. So if you were to ever need to restart everything and you did an account specific export, a backup won't work into a new account because that's account specific.
Got it. Interesting. Now, I want to talk about them. This is going to be a whole section as well. But for now, I did want to, it's relevant here. In the LastPass data breach that happened where vaults were leaked, something that was interesting to me, and I never quite got a good answer about this. So it sounded like some fields in the LastPass vaults weren't encrypted at all.
Mm-hmm.
So what happened there? And because to me, when when I first started getting into password management, I'm also going to ask you about KeePass in a second here. KeePass is quite literally the way you define it. Like you have a KeePass database vault, and theoretically, it's easy for me to understand this single file is encrypted and then uploaded. But based on the LastPass data breach, it sounds like it's not as much of a like single file that's encrypted and more of like a dynamic, very complicated vault with various types of encryption, unless LastPass does something weird. So can you maybe speak to Bitwarden and how it might differ from what LastPass does? Is everything in Bitwarden encrypted completely, or are there specific things that are not end-to-end encrypted?
Yeah, you can see this. We have this documented on our website. So first, let's talk about let's start by talking about the LastPass breach and what happened there. So that was a very complex attack that was not a result of any encryption based breaches. Does that make sense? It was an operational breach. So there was something that was not secured properly in their day-to-day operations, and a very targeted attack was able to breach that and get this set of encrypted data out. Now, there was a couple of problems with this encrypted data. The first one is what you mentioned, that not everything in the vault was encrypted. And this was something that, here at Bitwarden, we had kind of raised as flags for a long time. They actually had a link. It doesn't exist any longer, but there was a link to the help documentation that said, yes, URLs for items are not encrypted. And we do this to ensure that we can provide you a better service and also serve icons to your vault. But what ended up happening is that hackers who had all of this data were able to find like the login, like the URIs, Universal Resource Indicator, which is a little bit more than just a link, right? Which is like a URL. And we're able to find like really specific ones and then target all of their cracking capabilities into those. And this would be crypto wallets, for example. Somebody could be like, oh, this is the address for a crypto wallet. Let me dedicate all of my time to cracking this and like sucking up the 8 or 9 Bitcoin that was in that wallet.
It's still happening too. There's articles that they're still draining wallets to this day, probably due to that.
It's crazy because it's still
Yeah.
taking a while, which is also like a testament to some of the encryption because it's been years now and it's still going through, and they're targeting very specific accounts to do so. Additionally, too, LastPass had a little bit of a failure in the KDF algorithm that I mentioned. I said Bitwarden's default is 600,000, right? Back when LastPass first started, their default was 1, and then they upgraded it to 10, and then 100. And any account that was over 10 years, they didn't do any forced upgrade to the new KDF algorithm because some of that requires, manual intervention depending on how the system works. And, because you have to enter your password to like undo everything and redo everything all over again. So some people were having all these crypto wallets that were exposed and only protected by 100 cycles of this KDF algorithm. So it was just trivial for someone just to set like a cracking machine onto some of these vaults just to crack them open and get what they wanted.
So this KDF algo, first off, has it always been 600,000 for you guys, or has it upgraded over time as well?
It's upgraded over time.
Okay.
And we're actually implementing some work too to allow people to make adjustments without having to do any additional inputs too, or
Cool.
logouts. So it's still being hardened.
Got it. And I assume for a regular end user, someone might go, why not just blast it to the max? And I assume it's because it's going to take a lot longer for your system to unlock the vault each time you type in the password.
That's right. People have tried on modern devices to go up to like 1 million. We'll let you do whatever you want. You can go to the setting and do like 1 million iterations or whatever. And some people would report like, oh yeah, it took 6 seconds to log in. So we're like, okay, whatever. That's fine to get some additional security on it. But 600,000 right now is the recommended amount of iterations based on NIST, which is the National Institute for Security and Technology. So that's where that is.
And is the reason why this is adaptive over time is because computers get more powerful, and so that your local device becomes more capable and has an easier time with a larger amount, as well as an attacker. So you need to keep bumping it up, and it's overall going to always take the same amount of time to unlock.
That's right. Yeah, it's a constant arms race.
Got it. Perfect.
Yeah, and we always have to balance, like usability with the likelihood of there being issues. And
is it adaptive? Do you do like a test when someone opens Bitwarden for the first time to test how powerful their machine is, and then pick a algorithm based on that?
No, we don't do that. Some people might not like it if we were tracking their machine, right?
Yeah. I feel like it could be done locally somehow. Like if someone opens it and it just does a quick CPU stress test for like 5 seconds and sees how the CPU responds, and then automatically sets like a recommended algo.
That's a very interesting idea. I like the idea. There's only one challenge here, and that is the KDF algorithm is universal across every machine. So if you could be running on your like super powerful gaming rig, right? Or you could be running on your dinky little laptop from 10 years ago.
Or Raspberry Pi.
It'd have to go through the same level of algorithms. So probably not.
Got it. Interesting though. Just to clarify, what can Bitwarden see? If I register for a Bitwarden account right now, I move all my passwords to it. Can you see my email to log in? Can you see anything inside the vault? What can you see on your end? If let's say you just wanted to leave the company, you're mad and it's an insider threat, and your goal is to find my vault before you leave. What could you find if you really wanted to find me?
All right, so there's a couple of things here. This is going to get into some fun stuff. So first, you can see whatever is collected and necessary on bitwarden.com/privacy. Like everything is clearly stated, what's encrypted and what isn't. What's not encrypted is your login email address, right? Because we need to be able to see who we're giving the vault to, right? So that's something that is kind of important to bring up here, is that security and privacy often go hand in hand, but it's important to remember that Bitwarden is a security company, and that's what we focus on, is security. And our services require that we have some data about you, like how to deliver you your vault from the cloud. That's a little bit difficult to do if we don't know who or what it's going to, if that makes sense.
Got it. And so other than that, because the email makes sense.
Yeah, so there are a couple of things. So here's a really fun experiment you can do. If you download the Bitwarden desktop application, you can log into your vault, right, and download it and get it on your machine. And then you can lock your vault without a PIN code, right? But if you lock your vault with the master password, you can then actually go onto your computer find the vault blob in the data folder and just open it up in Notepad. And everything you see there that's it. That's all that Bitwarden could see if we opened up your vault in the cloud too. So
Very cool.
that's it. Yeah, it's pretty straightforward that way.
Got it. And then how about, I assume billing, there is some visibility there as well.
Absolutely.
If you pay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And sub-processors too. Like, so Bitwarden uses Stripe. So there will be
Got
like
it.
some pass-through for there. And again, all that's available at bitwarden.com/privacy for all the like extreme finer details.
Yeah. Do you guys support any cryptocurrency payments if someone wants to avoid fiat?
Yeah, for people who want to pay with Bitcoin, we offer services through BitPay as our processor for that.
Very nice. And then I guess kind of a final question. I mean, it's not as relevant if it's end-to-end encrypted and you're working with small files, but where do you guys host your data?
So Bitwarden data is hosted on Microsoft Azure servers. In the United States, it's hosted on the East Coast, on the East Coast servers. And then we also have a EU option that's hosted in Ireland and the Netherlands.
Got it. And then if one of those servers comes down, you guys lose access to data. Do you have backups? Is data stored across multiple?
Yeah, everything is stored by Azure and the Azure point-in-time processes for those.
Got it. Okay, and then kind of the last privacy and security question, this section was a lot longer than I expected, but in a like really critical situation, let's say you get a government subpoena and it's like, hey, we have this email address for a user and we want to investigate this user. I guess what can you hand over as Bitwarden, and what kind of ways are you forced to have to comply, and what can you do? And also, what kind of policies do you have on like challenging these court orders when they come up? And do you guys have any kind of like transparency around this?
This is something that, interestingly, I haven't been asked about before, so I'm not exactly the most knowledgeable on it. I'm sure it's somewhere in our privacy policy, but I do know that no one will get anything useful besides like the administrative data that I talked about. Like the vault is going to be completely encrypted by the strength of, at minimum, your master password. So like there's that. Like that's not going to be of any use to anyone.
Got it. The eggs in one basket argument is something I want to dive into a little bit, because I can make the same arguments to people that you did. I think a lot of people understand the whole idea of having a central place that generates unique, strong passwords for you. But then now you're stuck with the situation where, oh my gosh, if I lose access to this one thing, or if someone I know breaks into this one thing, now they have access to all of my passwords instead of, maybe they'd have to guess each one for all of my accounts if I was using these semi-random passwords that added a 1 or 2 at the end of them. So what do you guys kind of suggest to users who are thinking about this? And do you think it's a valid concern?
Yeah, it's absolutely a valid concern. And it really just comes down to what somebody's preferences are when you're trying to balance security and convenience, right? So, for example, our first recommendation to anyone about password managers at all is use a password manager. We don't care which, just use one. Like that's going to be way more secure than not using one at all. That you have random generated passwords for every account. Now, obviously, like it's best to store all that, and easiest to store everything in one place at a password management service. But then you also want to make sure that any website that supports two-factor authentication, multi-factor authentication, anything like that, you want to make sure that you have that enabled too. Now, there's a lot of debate in the community about like, well, should I have my two-factor authentication be integrated into Bitwarden?
Ask that. Yeah.
Yeah, I know that's what you're going to
We get this all the time. Like,
yeah. People ask it all the time, and I absolutely get it. What's nice about having the two-factor authentication in your account, in your Bitwarden account, for example, is that it just makes it really convenient for people to, enter the password and then paste the TOTP code. And we find that if something is convenient, people are more likely to use it and therefore increase their security. And when you're using something like that, that improves your security against, like I mentioned before, a rainbow table attack, credential stuffing attack. It basically acts like a second password, that's essentially not guessable, which is, very handy. But then some people will say, well, what if somebody got into my Bitwarden account? Then I wouldn't have any way to prevent that. Well, the answer is make sure you have two-factor authentication on your Bitwarden account too, and practice good operational security. Make sure your vault locks or logs out at the right time. Use a strong master password. Use two-factor authentication. Be sure that you're not in a log out loop. Like, for example, if you get logged out of your email address and then you have email 2FA set up, that you won't be able to get into your Bitwarden account because we can't turn it off. There's no way to turn it off. So yeah, it really just comes down to how you want to do it and what makes the most sense for you.
Yeah, you guys released Bitwarden's own TOTP app, but it's offline only. It doesn't sync via the cloud still, or did you
No,
unrelease that
you can
functionality?
set it up to sync if you choose. Some
Okay,
people just want it to be easier. 'Cause, for example, you could sync things over and then disconnect the sync and then delete your seeds if you wanted to, just to make things a little bit easier and separate. But yeah, the TOTP app is created as an alternative to the built-in authenticator, and it's free. So I don't know if you're aware, but like the integrated authenticator is a premium feature, right? And if you don't have or pay for premium, because Bitwarden offers a fully feature-free plan, then you don't need to use the integrated authenticator because you can also use the also free Bitwarden TOTP app. So,
got it.
you have all your options, everything you need to be secure online right there.
Yeah, the one thing that I kind of also say when I get asked about this TOTP thing all the time as well. And for me, the TOTP, the main issue I feel like it prevents is a situation where your data gets leaked without your knowledge or something like this. Like, an account login, username, password gets leaked. It's on some
Hmm.
dark web forum. They find it, they try to log in with it, and no matter where your TOTP keys are stored, you're safe. Like that's ultimately to me the best thing that TOTP offers users is that second source of protection. And then I feel like it's more of a high level threat to be considering what if someone hacks into my password manager database, which would be incredibly hard to do. So that's typically what I've kind of defaulted to as a general option. I don't know if you have any feelings about that.
No, again, it all comes down to personal preference. Some people like to have the convenience, other people, they don't. Like,
Yeah.
I have some that are half and half, personally. Some inside Bitwarden, some not. But it's
Yeah.
really
No, the
convenient.
same.
It's really convenient for sharing things, right? So, for example, like I share passwords with my partner, and you want to have that two-factor authentication, but it makes it really difficult. Like you don't want to get a text message and be like, "Hey, can you send me the code in the next 30 seconds?" But at least this way you can share. It's also important, for business applications too that might require TOTP, and you don't want to try and get a hold of Bob who's on vacation and try to get into his email address to get the actual authentication code to log in. So like that's another aspect of it too, is that you can share the TOTP codes.
Yeah, very good point. And I have a hybrid solution as well. I guess I haven't really shared that publicly at all because no one's really asked about it because it's always an all or nothing. Should I do it? But lately, I've always had a dedicated TOTP app and I never really stored them in the password manager. But I've been getting really frustrated with the whole like, oh, I'm trying to log into a service and get something done, but my phone is in the other room because my phone is rarely on me. And so I have to go grab my phone, log into it, get my TOTP stuff. But anyway, I've set up a hybrid situation as well, where for me it's based on high security accounts. So things like my email, my bank accounts, et cetera, are still stored on a separate app. And then I have just kind of like okay, like this is fine. If someone ever got into this, it's not a huge deal inside of the password manager. So that's been a good hybrid for me to balance the two.
That's great. TOTP is also just one form of two-factor authentication. So for Bitwarden, you can have email, TOTP code, but also passkey. So
Great.
you can use like the WebAuthn 502 passkey, and in particular like hardware security keys like a YubiKey. That's personally what I have too. I've got one in my wallet that I keep around with me all the time. That's also protected by a pin. So there's a lot of ways you can stay secure.
Got it. Yeah, no, I love my YubiKey too, and that's my password manager access as well. Do you guys use it as only a passkey, or can you enable it to be your 2FA method?
It's so both. You can use it to log
Okay,
in with a passkey, or you could also use the passkey as a 2FA method.
perfect.
So
That's
yeah,
awesome.
and logging in with the passkey is pretty handy for a lot of people. Passkeys, still in development in terms of like the standard. The standard is out there, but sometimes you'll find that your browser might argue with you on who should be managing the passkey first, and then your operating system will pop into. And
Yeah,
you're
I
laughing
deal with
because
this.
you see it
Yeah,
happen.
yeah. I try to log in, and I didn't mean to click log in with passkey, so then it prompts my extension password manager. I say no. It prompts my browser. I say no. Then it prompts my operating system. I say no, and then it gives like the weird errors, and then it like,
Yeah.
uh,
Don't worry. Like we're working with Microsoft. We're working with Apple. You might have heard about the credential exchange protocol, which is something that an industry group that Bitwarden has been a part of that makes it easy to transfer passkeys from service to service. It's still an evolving and a very promising form of security. Just need to work on making it a little bit more user friendly and have people agree on the best way that thing should work and what it should look like.
Cool. I'm kind of down to the last few things here. So first, I want to ask you. Well, actually, before that, I want to ask you about your setup. But before, I did want to quickly just ask. This is something I like to ask the open source projects that have enterprise and community. Do you guys ever stumble on kind of a conflict of which customer base to prioritize when you're rolling out a feature? Are you like, hey, we want to roll out this feature, but it would be really bad for the enterprise customers, but it'll be really good for our community and vice versa? And like, how do you guys grapple with that and decide who to prioritize?
It's always a balance. But some of our best features for administrators came from the community. Like one of the big community requests that we had early on was emergency access. And that was setting up a way for someone to access your account if you're incapacitated, right? Just, so long as you have the premium feature enabled, any other Bitwarden user you could set up as your emergency access. And from that code came a level of key exchange with another user. And that blossomed into basically our account recovery process for enterprise. So there's all these features that are actually, maybe under the hood. I mean, maybe on the surface, not related, but under the hood, they are like that. You get that code together. So one can absolutely benefit the other.
Very nice. And then what's kind of your personal setup with your password managers? If you only have to share as much as you want.
Yeah, I'll share some information. So one of the things that a lot of people aren't aware of is what's called plus addressed email. So when you create your Bitwarden account or any other password manager account, and you have a email provider that supports plus address, that is your email address, then plus, like the literal plus sign, and then anything else at whatever.com, and it still goes to your inbox. So I would highly recommend that people create a unique plus addressed email for your login password, for your login account, and then set up a strong master password and all that. And what's nice about that is that, like if your email got leaked, but not your plus addressed email, right? And it's still going to the same account. You don't have to worry about it. And then I would make sure that you absolutely make sure that you maintain strong access to your email account. If necessary. So especially if you have like email TOTP codes, my email provider, I secure with my YubiKey and I remember the password. So that's like one of the two passwords I remember, right? Is my password for Bitwarden and my password for my email, and both of which are secured by the YubiKey, and the YubiKey secured with a PIN. So you have to know a couple of things to get into my account. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's very nice. I assume, I doubt that you're doing any kind of like large scale analysis here, but a lot of our audience is probably using simple login or like ADIO. So I assume the aliasing registration is going to offer a pretty similar thing.
Yeah, I would recommend though that if you ever lose access to your aliasing service, like might also be good to have that secured separately as well. But perhaps the most important thing, and a lot of people forget about this, is making sure that you have everything in a security preparedness kit. Like write down all the information you need, including a recovery code. When you create your two-factor authentication to log into Bitwarden, you'll be presented with a recovery code that will disable 2FA. Write that down, print it out, like put that on a physical piece of paper. We have a security readiness kit on our website. It's a template that I put together. A lot of people love it. I use it myself. I've got my stuff written down, like handwritten, and put into a safe. So like that's, if you ever find yourself in a situation in which you did lose memory or access to something, or someone else needs to access something for you, they can still get that piece of paper and log in. And someone would have to break into my house, go through my vault, and know what they're looking at to, actually compromise that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it very much does. And it's not something people think about, but yeah, I had a family member passing, like 3 to 6 months ago. And
I'm sorry.
I wasn't, yeah, it's, thank you. But it wasn't like, I'm not their like go-to family member, but their go-to family member really struggled to get into their accounts. It's not something people think about until it happens. And then you go, crap, I should actually think about this. Especially, I'm sure, in our community, because people really are pretty hardcore about their security and privacy. So it's always important to build in those backup plans for the people around you. Because what's the point of good security? To me, security is about keeping good people in and bad people out. It's not about keeping everyone out, period.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, Third-party integrations, I'm down to the last couple things here. I know you guys do integrate with those alias services. So do you have any other third-party integrations that people should know about?
We some of our two-factor authentication also includes Duo, YubiKey, OTP. That's for individuals. And then we also offer a lot of integrations for enterprise, lots of integrations for enterprise. And if there's something that you don't have an integration for that we don't have, we have 2 API keys that you can create your own integrations with. It's actually really cool. I highly recommend you check out the documentation on that, but you can pretty much do anything you need to.
Nice. AI, company stances on that?
We did recently release a MCP server for people who want to use AI, a self-hosted MCP server to use with other self-hosted installations for people who are experimenting with that sort of thing.
So like N8N, and then people could like automate things with Bitwarden?
Yeah, you could do auto. You could, you just be able to like, say like, hey, send a Bitwarden send, which is an encrypted communication, to my friend that contains this password, and it could do that for you and send it out. Nice. But this is mostly for the advanced people who know what they're doing. And so we have that documentation online, so you can see that.
I didn't know you guys had an MCP server, so I'll take a look at it.
We're not doing putting AI into the products. Right?
Yeah,
like that's. A lot of people are very uncomfortable about that idea.
I think it's the right middle ground. I think the problem right now and why so many people have this, well, there's a lot of reasons why people have a visceral reaction to AI, but I think one of the core ones is because it's just kind of shoved into the product without much thought into like what it's actually doing for the user. But I feel like in a lot of those situations, an MCP server would actually solve most of the use case there, because then you're actually doing something useful potentially with the data. And I feel like the example you gave is a really good one. And that'd be far more useful than some like, oh, summarize my vault for me AI feature.
I think, if you're really comfortable about, and you have everything on-prem, right, which is, and air-gapped, which is also a possible thing too. Somebody could be like, hey, here is, they could set an agent that connects to like their Slack or something, and you can Slack say, hey, give this person access to this item for 25 minutes. And then, there's a lot of options. And when people are working on this, like, we love to hear feedback from the community.
Nice. A few hours before recording, I have a Signal group with some community members in it. And there is a little bit of outrage because they got an email from 1Password that they just raised their prices quite substantially. So I did want to just quickly check in. You said there's always a free plan, and that's been a promise. Mm-hmm. But how do you guys handle price increases, and how do you do that, transparently? And is that something users should expect at some point as well?
So it's funny. This is actually pretty timely. Bitwarden, we did update our pricing for our plans last month. Okay. And so it was our first time updating pricing since the inception of Bitwarden. So it was $1.65 a month now, charged annually for the individual plan. But we always have the free plan, and the free plan will always be there, and it already has everything everybody needs. So you can see the communication, you can see what the community says. Most are fully supportive of that sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's still just pennies for good security. I think it's good. And then F-DROID. Do you guys have an F-DROID app?
We do. Okay. There actually was there was some chatter about it recently because we had an issue with it publishing. I need to double check on that, but it is there. And people who are like really big into like looking at trackers and stuff, they might notice on our Android app, some tracking applications will say, oh, your Android app has 2 trackers in it. Well, it's Firebase and Crash Analytics. It's nothing. We're not tracking your data. But if you want a version of the app that doesn't have those analytics, you can get the F-DROID app, and that's out there.
Got it. And then is that on the official repo, or do you guys host your own repo?
It's on the official repo.
Okay, very nice. Yeah. Linux. You guys are on Linux too?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, we support Linux. Great. Yeah, well, so many different kinds. You can go to bitwarden.com/downloads and see all the different options that are there.
Perfect. Just making sure I cover my bases before I get comments about it. So that is all I have. Do you have kind of like a final takeaway for all our viewers?
Yeah, I do. So first, I do want to add one more thing. We didn't talk about it before. We were talking about security on the cloud. And that is, when your encrypted vault is uploaded to the Bitwarden cloud server, it doesn't just sit there only protected by your master password. There are, well, we call it multi-factor encryption. There are at least 3 different other layers of encryption that go onto the cloud server with keys in different locations that are all protected significantly through key management software that makes it so that even if there were like some sort of cloud breach and somebody was just able to grab the blob of the entire Bitwarden server and take it down, there's nothing there for them, right? So that's another important thing to talk about. Like, there's no way that anybody will ever get anything into a state that would not have more than 3 levels of encryption on the cloud server plus your master password encryption. So something to think about if you're ever worried about like security of the cloud server.
Nice.
And then the final message to anybody out there who's interested about security: use any password manager. Choose whatever works for you. It doesn't have to be Bitwarden. Just anything that works for you that you will use is going to make you vastly more secure. We would like for you to use Bitwarden because we think we have one of the best products on the market, and it's free. With unlimited passwords, unlimited devices. There's no strange limitations on that. So absolutely, check us out. Get any password manager at all. Get your friends in a password manager because passwords are very stubborn. They're not going away. And, you need to absolutely make sure that you are secure in this crazy cybersecurity world.
Perfect. And is there anything on the pipeline that you're able to share that you guys are working on with the audience?
Yeah, there's one thing, especially for Linux users that are interested in this sort of thing, although it's not out for Linux yet. One thing that people have been kind of waiting for with bated breath for as they're seeing some of the code be developed is what's called AutoType, desktop AutoType. And that is especially handy for people who use virtual machines all the time and they're logging in remotely connections. And that is just being able to have the desktop app essentially type for you the password out into an application that's local on your machine. So very handy where you for example, need to put something into a window that might not be a browser, right? And so people are definitely excited for that. It's going to initially come out as a Windows-only feature for the desktop application, but we're still pursuing going full platform with that.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Ryan. I know this is very thorough, and I hope that we were able to at least get some people using some more secure passwords out there.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you for your time.
I want to thank Bitwarden for coming on this podcast. It has been a complete honor. They are a community favorite service. And so to actually have them on here and talk to them directly has been an absolute pleasure. If you have any questions, definitely leave them down in the comments on YouTube or I suppose on Spotify too. And if you want to support this podcast and keep it going, you can also consider becoming a Techlorian. You get access to a private Signal group. You also get access to my own private RSS feed that I curate with news on a daily basis and many other fun perks while still contributing to our content. Thank you all so much for being here, for listening, and keeping yourself and the people around you a little bit safer. Until next time.